Achirishi Khweneri Hoyar Uchatole Peskani Uchabiji Uchatole Peskani Agne Chochadzikwate Hoyar Horonamani Mani Uchabiji Horonamani Mani Piraliren Beliren Hoyar Gitanunyal Damluhi Uchabiji
Greetings and welcome to Georgian Crossroads. This is Byrne Power in Tbilisi, Georgia, and today what we're going to do is explore Georgian puppetry a little. Not all of it. I will probably at some point do more of a survey of Georgian puppetry, but Georgia has a fine tradition of puppetry, and there are, as a city goes, I would put Georgia near the top as far as places to go to watch puppet shows. The one caveat to that is that they are not regular in the sense that you can't depend that every week or every 2 weeks or every other day or whatever, there will be a puppet show. But if you pay attention, let me give you actually some of the names of the puppet theaters. The most important one, and the one you really want to try to see, and you can buy tickets for these, all of these can be found on a website called tickets.ge, and they'll let you know what's coming. It's also a good place to get tickets for dance and other kinds of things. But the Rezo Gabriadze he passed away sadly a couple of years ago, but he was an amazing theater director, puppet director, screenwriter, filmmaker. And he put together a show called The Battle of Stalingrad, which is the most important, most bloody, most decisive battle of World War II, as seen through the eyes of animals. He also did another one, which I really love, called Ramona, about two trains who love each other and are sent to different places in World War II and get beaten up and eventually are smelted together for their iron, where they will live forever, melted together, which is an amazing concept. But the Rezo Gabriadze Marionette Theater is well worth spending money. It's a little pricier than most marionette theaters, not nearly as pricey as some of the European theaters, puppet theaters. So, another theater I would recommend is the Tbilisi State Puppet Theater. And they have one show that I particularly appreciate that is the story of Tbilisi. And it is done, for instance, at one point, they have a table with sandcastles representing the city, and they're on fire. Fire in a puppet show. Amazing. Then there is a newer theater, the Tbilisi Chamber Theater, which was started a couple of years ago by a friend of mine, Georgi Abkhazava, and they will do puppet shows. They recently, at the end of last year, they did their version of Don Quixote, which was an incredible and meaningful show. They also will do kind of experimental theater, small performances, and they have a semi-regular schedule as well. They can be found on Facebook if you want to find out what they do. As well as the Marjanishvili Theater, which is a standard theater which shows plays. The Marjanishvili Theater also has, working with them, a puppeteer and set designer, Nino Nemetcheshvili, who has interesting puppet shows. I saw her version of The Little Prince, Le Petit Prince, and she also has done quite a few other shows. So the Marjanishvili Theater, occasionally has puppet shows. Again, all of these, even the Gabriadze Theater doesn't have a regular schedule. They'll be on for a few weeks, maybe a month or two, and then they'll be on the road, and then they'll come back. Such is life. So you really have to do some research, but it's well worth doing. By far, the most unusual puppet theater here is, but they also do abstract finger shadows of, they did one series that was all, they did one show that was segments of St. Matthew's Passion done as abstract hand shadows. Just fantastic. There are also many art doll makers here, but when I discovered the works recently of Bachana Khalvshi, I was impressed that these were some of the most beautiful, delicate, exquisite puppets I had ever seen. Let me tell you a little bit about how I discovered them. In October of 2022, I entered the old converted Marani on Melikashvili Street, right before it turns into Chavchavadze Avenue. It was called the Hermit Space. Now, when you enter, there are dark, rounded brick walls of an old Georgian wine cellar, and they invited me to step in further. And there were quite a few other things there, including a friend who had tipped me off to this exhibition of artistic puppets. And the name Bachana Khalvshi was unknown to me at that point. I didn't bring a camera, didn't even think about taking photos, and didn't have any particular expectations of what I would find when I got there. But the minute I turned the corner of this long cavernous space, you enter and it's straight, and then it divides up into different spaces. And so I turned the corner, and I saw these marionettes, and immediately I knew I was in the presence of some highly unique creatures. Now, I have traveled across Europe researching puppetry, interviewing puppeteers, watching puppet shows, and much more. And because of that, I recognized at once that the marionettes hanging there were some of the most delicate and unusual I had ever seen, whether in performance, in museums, or even in books. There are many types of puppets in this world, some very crudely made, some made just for children, almost like toys, some sarcastic, some made just for adults, and some are works of art. Bachana's puppets were clearly works of art. Now, the most artistic marionettes I have ever seen are those of Richard Teschner, which are on display in the Theater Museum in Vienna. Bachana's are a close second. Hanging one by one, in a line, in the dark, resting on black podiums, I caught myself staring first at the textures of each piece. The puppets themselves represented two different stories. One from the Book of Kings in the Bible. When did he start working on, what's the official story of this one called? I know it's from the Bible, Kings.
Lives of the Kings.
Okay.
Lives of the Kings.
Okay.
I will talk about 2 minutes about this story. He was studying as a cinematography theoretical course also, and he always wanted to shoot a movie, but instead of shooting a movie, he was he started working on the puppets And I was always very interested how deep the puppets can go in the literature words, like how it can touch the deepness of the literature.
And the other from Molière. You've got the biblical story here from the Book of Kings, and you've also got the Molière story. When did he start working on those?
I was always very inspired with the French style of colored graphics and dramaturgy of Molière, and all that inspired me to start working as a puppets for this theater.
In our later discussions, Bachana told me he had taken the old fabrics from a friend's grandmother's scarves and dresses and cut them and reimagined them to fit Molière's play. The combination of kind of a gray-brown woven fabric with small pearls and other jewels with their shiny whites and silvers was just a perfect tension between the rough, handmade quality of the clothing and the shininess of the jewels. The Old Testament figures were clothed more simply, yet still filled with character and beauty. One fascinating aspect that I had never seen before in any marionettes in any country was that one of the 8 strings holding the marionette up was attached to the nose. And this was an odd touch. And I should have asked him where he got this idea, because it's none I've ever heard of before. Marionettes are usually connected at the shoulders, top of the head, back of the neck, among other places on the puppet's body. But having a black string arising from the nose gave them an unknowable, mysterious charm. Through a friend, I was introduced to Tamta, who had curated the show. She introduced me to Bachana, and we worked out a time for me to come back and shoot some video material and an interview for my Gravity from Above channel, which is where you're probably watching this from right now. Bachana, being in his 60s, was fully active in puppetry during the late Soviet era. With a background in painting and textile design, Bachana started working with Rezo Gabriadze in the early 80s. By the end of the decade, he was on his own performing and creating marionettes, the same marionettes on display in this exhibition, and his shows were well received. During the Soviet era, all of the artists developed a coded language through their art to get around the dull literalness of the censors. The 80s was an important time for Georgian artists from many genres, and Bachana's inspirations reflect the best of that era. Life became more difficult in the 90s because of the struggles for independence and the Georgian Civil War. Eventually, Bachana started a winery and began producing excellent wines. And in fact, he won an award for a tarragon cha-cha. Cha-cha is a kind of a vodka-like substance made from the remains of grapes. He invited myself, Tamta, and a couple of other friends out to his modern Marani for a wonderful meal and wine tasting. He may not be active in the puppet theater community anymore, but he has left us with a legacy of beauty, delicacy, and artistic exploration. In the Georgian language, the word tojina represents both puppets and dolls. And Bachana Khalvashi's puppets are indeed like living dolls hanging from strings, still alive, still speaking to us.
uchabichi gitanunya dalugi metkochi mon gagalu hoyar ke bishida varjugi uchabichi ke bishida varjugi Sihe komot megom skun hoyar esirmoni bashlugi uchabichi esirmoni bashlugi Sihe komot kyokodi hoyar osh meshigem tumani uchabichi osh meshigem tumani
Dash kurdun alabazope hoyar var bizgerem tumani kale bozo var bizgerem tumani
dot kvido do bigura
And thank you, Tamta.
ძალიან მიხარია რომ გაგიცანით.
I'm very glad.